So now we're going to learn about how the first house and the seventh house interact via their lords. So the information in this video will be relevant in any case, for example, where you have the first lord in the seventh house, or the seventh lord in the first house, or the first and seventh lords joining somewhere, or the first and seventh lords mutually aspecting each other. But most of all, this is relevant for understanding the DNA code, quote-unquote DNA code, of your houses, which is the key bit of information that I give you in the Houses of Life report that I've recently released. And in fact, it's in order to help people get the most out of that report and that code that I decided to do this series of videos. So if you don't have that code yet, you can go get one of those reports from my website to get it. If you have in that code a sequence where 1 and 7 are following each other, like for 1, 7 or 7, 1, then this will be very relevant. Or if you have 1 and 7 at opposite ends of the codes, then this will be very relevant. So without further introductory ado, let's look at what goes on interpretively when first and the seventh house link via their lords. There are two things which you must bear in mind. The first is that first house is self, seventh house is non-self or others. And the second thing is that the first house is birth and the seventh house is death, because first is sunrise and seventh is sunset. So these two resonances are really vibrating loudly when you put the seventh and the first lords together somehow or another, or the seventh and the first houses together somehow or another. And that resonance is not very pleasant. It's a disharmonious resonance. In terms of the self versus non-self disharmonious resonance, the key thing to realize here is that the way that we define ourself has a huge impact in our relationships, because the self is half of the relationship. So the definition of the self is going to hugely impact the way that we partner up with other people, the way we interact with people, the way we exchange with other people. So it's going to affect things like even business, our ability to interact and buy and sell things. It's going to affect things like teaming up, forming teams, cooperative teams, and it's certainly going to affect marriages and that type of partnership and relationship. Now, the nature of what to interpret from this differs based on what comes first, 7 or 1. So if you have the house 1 leading and house 7 following, then the interpretation is that we define ourself by looking towards the non-self. And if it's vice versa, where house 7 is leading and house 1 is following, then we define the non-self via looking towards ourself. First house leading, seventh house following would be the case where seventh lord comes into the first house. First house is center stage and seventh lord is operating in it. In this situation, first leading, seventh following, we're defining the self by the non-self. So in other words, we'll be overly reliant on other people to tell us who we are, tell us what we want, tell us what we should be, give us a name, give us a meaning, etc. So we won't have enough confidence and independence. And like I said, this is going to affect not only your romantic relationships and marriages, it will affect how you operate on teams, how people treat you in teams, and that's going to affect how you succeed in the business world as well. If it's the other way around, where seventh is leading and first is following, then that's the case which is akin to the first lord going into the seventh house. Then the key word there is defining non-self via self, and what that means is we will be expecting other people to be us. And we will be imposing our opinions and our viewpoints, etc., on others. So we would just expect expect that the spouse would feel the same way about something that we do, and it would be inadmissible that the spouse may have a differing opinion. We don't have enough sympathy in the business world for the market. We're not sympathetic enough or sensitive enough to the market, so we miss the business opportunities, and we don't know how to customize or tailor our product to the market. Now, if you have in the code first house on one side and seventh house on the other side, if this is the case, where the first one is on the left, or the functionally good side, and the seventh is on the right, the functionally negative side, then you're going to have the self being at odds with the non-self, and the self is coming first. In both of the cases, if they're on the two ends of the spectrum, it's going to be self at odds with non-self. But if the first house is on the left, or the good side, then the self comes first, and if the seventh is on the left, then the non-self comes first. So in other words, here's the situation where we feel that our interests, wants, needs, opinions, etc. do not mesh with others. We don't see the interests of other people as being anyway our self-interest. We see our self-interest being very different from the interest of others. This is what you're getting when you get 7 and 1 on opposite ends of the spectrum. If one is coming on the left side, then we're putting too much emphasis on our needs and our wants, and it's screwing up our business partnerships, our romantic partnerships, and so on. If 7 is coming on the left side, which means 7 is the prominent one, the positive one, then we're putting too much emphasis on other people. We're not realizing that the needs of the one serve the needs of the many, and the needs of the many serve the needs of the one. In other words, a brick in the wall, the self is a brick in the wall is the team or the group or the partnership, but the quality of the brick determines the quality of the wall, and the quality of the wall determines the environment that the brick thrives in or dies in. So the needs and wants of the partner are equivalent or equal to or same as the needs and wants of the individual. This is the thing that has to be learned by a person with 1 and 7 on opposite ends of their code. So now that's an explanation of what's going on with the disharmonious resonance between self and non-self in the first house and the seventh house. The other thing happening, as I mentioned earlier, is birth and death. The first house being where the sun rises, so it represents birth, and the seventh house being where the sun sets, so it represents death. So there's two things to bear in mind here interpretively. Birth means beginning, and birth means becoming visible, and death means ending, and death means becoming invisible. So we have two symbolic themes to explore. One is beginning versus ending, and the other is visible versus invisible. So let's take a look first at beginnings versus endings. So if you have first house leading, seventh house following, or in other words, seventh lord going into the first house, this indicates a person whose intention is to finish things. They start things with the intention of finishing things. So they may not pay attention to preparations, or they may not pay attention to doing the thing correctly. They just want to get to the end of it. If it's the other way around, where the seventh is leading and first is following or supporting, then here's a person that again tries to finish things right away because they want to start something else. They want to start something new, or maybe they want to restart it and try it again. If you have the 1 and 7 on opposite ends of the code, and 1 is at the left and 7 is at the right, the person has difficulty finishing. They're very good at starting things, but not good at finishing things. And if it's the other way around, 7 on the left and 1 is on the right, then they have difficulty renewing or starting things after they finish something else. So they'll have this period of lostness or no direction after something is finished. Now, as for the visible versus invisible aspect of the birth versus death resonance, This will actually be nice if you have them in sequence. First house followed by seventh house, or seventh house followed by the first house. Because what it's indicating there is the person who can see the end from the start. This is why, with the sequence, the person starts to finish. They see the end from the start and they want to get to the end. Or they see the end as a way to start something new. So again, they're rushing to the end. But one of the good twists of this is that they see the end in the start, so they kind of see how blueprints and plans relate to finished products. So they're pretty good with putting theories into practice and seeing how theory goes into practice, seeing how plans are put into action. If 1 and 7 are in a sequence. However, if 7 and 1 are on poles, on the opposite ends of the code, then this is what they don't have. They don't have the ability to see the end from the start, or to see the theory in the practice. So this is why with the beginning versus ending thing, they have difficulty finishing or difficulty starting. So house 1 and 7, they're very, very opposite. Literally speaking, they're opposite. They're east and west. So there's nothing really here except for dissonance, dissonant, disharmonious resonances. So it is a difficult thing to put the first and 7 lords into connection with each other, and to put the first lord in the 7th house, 7th lord in the first house. So these are the things you should be aware of that are going on. By being aware of these things, you can know what to do to balance your life properly. Hopefully this helps out a lot. Thank you very much.